Hi everyone and welcome. We're in my wormery and today we're going to try to bring closure to a couple unresolved topics that were sort of cliffhangers, if you will, last week's update. And one of them, to begin with here, is going to be my third and final finishing tub. And when I refer to finishing tub, what I'm talking about is a tub into which I placed what I considered to be my completed finalized castings, and at this point it's been over 80 days, 81 days to be precise, I believe, since this material's been sitting in this tub. And what I've been trying to do over the course of time is bait out any sort of remaining worms that made their way into the material during the sifting process, but also to lure out any worms that may have actually hatched in this container as a result of their cocoons being transferred into this container for the purpose of finishing. So over time we've been visiting my other finishing tubs, and we've actually marked those off as complete, those other two tubs, and this tub still seemed to have a fairly good sized worm population in it. And it was for that reason we decided to one more time deploy what I refer to as a bait bomb into this bin. And this bait bomb, as I call it, is really nothing more than a piece of newspaper into which I placed some delicious food that the worms should consider irresistible. In this case it was watermelon rinds. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is try to fish out whatever few worms I can manually from this feeding zone. See if I can leave some of the castings behind in the process. And I'm going to inspect what's inside of this bait bomb momentarily. But the first thing I wanted to do is sort of come up with a judgment call on whether or not it would be necessary to deploy yet another bait bomb into this bin. And that was going to be based on whether or not I found a fair number of worms to still be in the material. And if you're, I don't know, if you're like me, you'll probably consider what we're seeing here as still a fair number of worms. So I believe that the prudent thing to do at this point is to give this bin, to give this finishing tub maybe one more try at allowing the worms to depopulate, to make their way over into a fresh bait bomb. And then I guess at some point, you know, maybe I'll just have to call it quits and accept the fact that maybe some straggler worms will remain in the material, and then maybe even make their way out into the garden, which really is not a problem as far as I'm concerned. But you know, there eventually has to come a time when I draw a close to this process, and I believe that after 80 some odd days, and if I give it another 8 or 9 days, at that point it's going to be 90 days. We're talking about almost a quarter, you know, almost an entire season dedicated to allowing this material to sort of finish off and to depopulate. So that's what I'm going to do here. Is I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to implant one more of my little bait bombs. Let me just go grab a piece of newspaper for that purpose. Okay, so now what we're going to use for this is a nice delectable piece of melon. So I'm just going to wrap that piece of melon up in the newspaper as I've done in the past, and gently place it down here back in the middle, and cover up the material and put it back up on the shelf and give it a little bit more time. The next time we check in on it, we'll make another decision about whether or not it's time to consider this material as done, and if it is, then so be it. It'll be my final tub of finished vermicompost, out of 3 that were started on the same day. The other 2 are now what I consider to be done. So we're going to get this one back up on the shelf and let it continue with what's been happening. All right. All right, so now we're starting here with one of my my newer bins, and you'll notice how I'm covering it a little bit differently than I normally do. Normally I've got newspaper on the right on the surface of the vermicompost, and then on top of that, normally just a layer of cardboard covering up. So in this case, I had a piece of cardboard all the way up on top here, and down here, all I had was this little piece of paper, which remarkably is been gobbled all the way through, right from the center. What this really was 2 or 3 days ago, I put down this sheet of paper, and I put this little piece of watermelon rind and this little piece of banana peel on top of it. And what my aim was to try to lure out any mites. Because if you watched my video last week, place a link to it so you can check it out and get caught up. But basically, when I went to feed these bins a week ago or so ago, I was a little bit shocked, taken aback, so to speak, by the presence of mites. A whole bunch of mites running around, wreaking havoc in the bin. I don't know if it's really wreaking havoc, but basically I just didn't really want them in my bin, you know. So I went ahead and I removed the newspaper, even the feeding zone markers that were in this bin, as well as the cardboard on top, and I left it all outside. It's been outside in the sun, blazing hot heat, 100 degrees weather, so it's been baking in the sun and the heat, and my hope is that those pieces of newspaper are now free of any mites. But my whole aim with this piece of paper here, with the watermelon on top and the banana peel on top, was to see if I could lure out any newly hatching mites. And man, they are very hard to see, but if you look really close, you could see little stuff moving down here, little tiny things moving about. And I believe it's what a lot of people cautioned me about last week, which was, hey, you know, get rid of all the paper, get rid of all the cardboard. Chances are you've got mite eggs all over that stuff, and then when they hatch, you're going to be right where you started. You know, I might have shaken off all the mites, but their babies are going to be back furiously. This is interesting. I think these are worm cocoons, right? Worm cocoon here, worm cocoon there, and over here as well. Something that I normally don't really do very well, which is spot worm cocoons. But there you go. I just spotted 3 of them. Maybe because I was sort of focused on looking at tiny objects by trying to zero in on these little moving specks all over the paper. But these are basically newly hatched mites as far as I can tell. And man, you know, what I've decided to do is take some countermeasures. Decided to try to get rid of these little guys. What I decided to do was get some of this stuff over here. This is a package of what they refer to as Diatomaceous Earth. And it's meant as sort of a pesticide, an all-natural organic pesticide, to wipe out any sort of crawling insects, including mites, from what I understand. So what we're going to do here is we're going to just do what I normally do, which is feed my bin. But what we're also going to try to do at the end is deploy countermeasures to try to eliminate the mites. Because you can see from that little piece of paper we looked at earlier, they're already on their way back. Before we get into all that stuff with the Diatomaceous Earth, why don't we feed the bin? Here, I believe the feeding zone was over, would have probably been down the middle, because this is one of my newer bins. I've got 2 newer bins that were launched on the same day, and to the best of my recollection, I'm still feeding those down the middle. So the feeding zone for these should have been down the center over here. So we're just going to push stuff aside, and you could tell the material is a lot more damp, and I believe that has a lot to do with the way I was covering the bin. With the bin having sort of a lid, it didn't allow for much, if any, evaporation. So any sort of moisture kicking off the last feeding is more or less staying within the bin, resulting in much more damp vermicompost, which I'm sure the worms love, but unfortunately I believe it's also something that the mites like as well. I think the mites are drawn to a moist, damp environment. So when it comes time to cover this thing up, I'm going to probably cover it up in a way that allows for a lot more evaporation to occur than the way I had it. We've got a nice worm population in here. Here we've got some of the cabbage that we fed with last week. Still see some signs of it, and yeah, I could definitely tell it's cabbage because of the smell. It's pretty stinky. Even though I love cabbage, but yeah, it's kind of getting to that stage now where it's getting a little bit ripe and stinky. So, alright, we're just going to try to keep all this old food that was down in the feeding zone from previous feedings down low where it was originally. But we're also going to plop in a little bit of new food for them. We're going to do that with, I guess, probably not too much. I think we're doing pretty good on this bin as far as food is concerned. So we'll just drop in a couple banana peels and a little bit of cucumber peels and some secondhand coffee, some spent coffee, and here's some paper. I'm going to try to set up sort of a baiting zone for drawing the mites to a certain location, which hopefully stays kind of dry, because the diatomaceous earth, as far as I understand it, only works if it's dry. So that's what I'm struggling with here, is how I'm going to accomplish this to get the mites onto a piece of paper where the diatomaceous earth is, but it's also kept relatively dry. So I've got an idea, so why don't we just do it? Here, let's see how it works out, okay? So I'm going to start out by simply covering up the feeding zone. And as we normally see, we can see there's plenty of worms in here other than just in the feeding zone. So these bins are very densely populated, so it doesn't seem to matter where I'm feeding, there's worms everywhere. Okay. Right. I'll try to level things off here to a certain degree. I'm going to sort of try to reproduce the environment in which I originally noticed the mites. Okay, so that's going to begin with just a newspaper covering. Okay. And I believe that without covering this up, any sort of moisture that does start to wick up into the paper will have a chance to evaporate fairly quickly. So, but I still want to create a space that's going to attract the mites. So, to do that, I'm going to create a little space over here where I do cover up with a piece of cardboard. However, I'm not going to cover up the entire lid so as to allow for a fair amount of evaporation in the bin to allow things to dry off a little bit. So I'm just going to put a little piece of cardboard here. Okay, so the cardboard, I'm going to use this perforated side down so that only part of the cardboard is actually touching the newspaper, so that there are sections of it that do have a chance to remain dry and not create moisture and allow the airflow underneath. So, but before I do that, all right, I'm going to create a little platform, because you notice that that piece of paper that was here, if it was the mites just burn right through the paper. So I want to create a little bit of a platform here as well to sort of put a little piece of bait food on there. Just a little piece of, just say banana peel, right? But on top of that, I'm going to use this little, I believe it's used for maybe put some tea leaves into it and to use to create tea. I'm going to use this to sift the diatomaceous earth onto this area so that if we got mites cruising around, they're going to get the diatomaceous earth onto them, and theoretically it's going to wipe them out. Okay, so let's see how this works. It's been rather humid lately, so I was kind of hoping that today the humidity is dropping gradually, so I was kind of hoping that the humidity level was going to be low enough that I can handle this stuff, because it's kind of like flour almost. It's got an extremely fine consistency to it, almost like dust. And it's the reason I wanted to use this strainer to spread it, because then I've at least got a small chance of sort of creating a sort of a dusting sort of approach to it. So you don't want to just pile it down in a big heap. You want to kind of spread it around, and I believe that should be adequate. So to finish off, we're just going to put this piece of cardboard on top and see how it goes. I'm just going to leave it like this so that moisture can wick off and evaporate. If mites find themselves on the paper trying to go under here for shelter or try to go after the food item that's on top, they're going to have to tread across all of that diatomaceous earth, and hopefully it'll wipe them out. So this is my first try at using this stuff, keeping my fingers crossed. I don't know, we'll see, I guess. So let's do this to the next one. Alright, so I've already removed the top off this one, but you can see it's the same story just like before. Whatever it was, I don't know if it's worms coming up from below and doing this, but it's more likely the mites. I'm assuming it's the mites chomping through this paper and just leaving a big gaping hole. So I'm not sure. It could be worms, who knows. But yeah, they really chewed through this paper, because I only did this maybe two or 3 days ago. Put this paper down with a little bit of delectable food on there for them, and now there's just a big hole there. All right, just get these sprouts out of here. We're just going to pretty much do the same as we did on the last bin. This bin was covered similarly. Normally I cover just with a piece of cardboard over the top, but this one also had just a sheet of cardboard resting across the rim of the container. And by doing so, any moisture coming off the material trying to evaporate into the air stayed within the bin, and I think created this much more moist, damp environment than you normally see in my bins. Now, in this bin I don't see as many signs of the cabbage that I fed last week, but I did feed about an equal amount, so maybe this bin is just a little bit more active than the other one. It's hard to say. I just wish they would start making greater progress on some of these old food items. They're definitely making progress. You can almost see through this thing. It's it's pretty much hollow. They're going for the middle of the corn cob, and eventually the corn cob just falls apart. So it's definitely getting consumed. It just takes time. Here we have a cork. So for worms to make their way into it, it takes time, if it's even possible. So whatever, at some point we might just remove it, but it's just interesting to see if a cork tends to break down or stay put, but so far it's been staying put pretty good. I always just like to inspect how some of these slow composting items are making progress, and the corn cob's definitely starting to break down. They're getting chewed out from the inside out, from what I can tell, hollowed out, and just much easier to break than they were. See, if I snap one in half, you can see right down into the middle of it, and you can see it's full of worms feeding away. So I guess they really like the inside of it. Okay, enough of this. I'm always fiddling around with my bins, always wasting time. Sorry about that. We're going to just feed in a very similar way. We're just going to plop in a couple of banana peels, a handful of cucumber peel, and some coffee grinds. Once again, I'm just trying to sort of break this stuff up a little bit, aerate it a bit, if you will. It is very muddy, so it's probably going to do it some good to be exposed to the air a little bit more than it's been lately, to let it start to dry out a bit, because it is very damp. Okay, it's relatively flat. Okay, we can cover up with just a new piece of paper in this case. And then the same as we did before, we had set up a little bit of a platform, so to speak, on which to place a little bit of a lure, like so. And then we're going to surround it like we did before with the Diatomaceous Earth. Trying to spread it evenly and finely. Alrighty. Once again, I'm just going to cover up with this piece of corrugated, like so, and leave it open to hopefully allow some of this moisture to evaporate out. Okay, that's 2 out of 4. Let's move on. Alright, so here again I'm just kind of covering up over the top, not all the way down on the material. So I don't know, I definitely see little stuff cruising around. Looks like what we identified as mites in the past. Yep. Some very small ones, but some of them looking pretty mature, so maybe they just come up out of the material. But you know, however they get here, I've got them in my sights, and I'm hoping that my efforts work to eliminate them. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Now, in this bin being slightly older than the other 2 that we just fed, this one's already being fed over here on the edge. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to maintain that as the feeding zone, where I'm going to add some more food this go around. The only difference in terms of what we should expect to see here, though, is these older bins, since I'm trying to get them closer to the harvest stage, have not been fed any slow composting food items, with the exception of 1 corn cob. So what we should find down in here is this, a corn cob. And it's already getting broken down quite nicely, I'm surprised. But other than that, there should be really nothing else that qualifies as a slow composting food item. This is just some banana stems, I believe. I don't really see any traces or smell the cauliflower from the last feeding. So this bin definitely seems like it's quite active. In fact, I don't even see much of the newspaper that was in here as bedding. All right, pretty cool. Either way, I am trying to just maintain sort of a steady food supply. So, a couple banana peels, some cucumber cuttings. And one other thing I want to add here is some rice, some leftover rice, which I've found that the worms do seem to enjoy. So I'm just going to include that in these last couple bins. And we're just going to keep the slow composting food item over here on the edge like we did last time we fed. So, alright, not bad. Oh, I guess some of the rice made its way over here. Shouldn't be a problem. They should eventually find that and eat it as well. So I'm going to start moving some of this material from this opposite side over. This stuff is not so damp. So this has not been the feeding zone for some time now. So it's starting to dry out a little bit finally. Not sure what that is. It might actually be a rock. Yeah, you can tell from when it hits the table. Actually, I got a couple things that appear to be rocks. Strange. All right, so we're just gonna loosely cover up the feeding zone here. Trying to break up and aerate the material a little bit in the process. Level it off too while we're at it. And we're going to try to set up our mite traps here as well. And it's going to be the only covering, so there'll be no cardboard covering the bin this go around. I'm going to go ahead and create a little platform on which to place a tempting piece of banana peel for them. And then surround the area with diatomaceous earth. I've seen many different ways people spread this stuff, but it seemed to me like this would be a good way. I remember my mom using this method to spread powder sugar onto pastries to make sure that you get sort of a consistent, even covering. All right, we're just covering up now. Okay. One last bin to go. Okay, here again I was just covering up across the top. And here again it looks like they've ripped through, right through that piece of paper. So I mean, I've not seen mites in the past, and it's and also I don't remember seeing stuff chew through paper as quickly as I've seen my paper get chewed up lately. So I think the chewed up paper is probably a pretty good indicator that that mites are the culprits. So kind of just putting one and one together. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm just sort of correlating the presence of mites to the fact that I've just recently observed paper getting chewed up much more quickly than I've seen in the past. Okay, so we'll just eradicate some of these sprouts they're trying to pop through. Okay. Okay, so here again, this being an older bin, it's been getting edge fed. And here again, like I've mentioned in the past, the material is very fine castings all along the top, a little bit more damp than the rest. That to me is also another visual indicator that that's where the feeding zone's occurring last. So these two older bins should have been set up very similar to one another. So I believe here too I would have had one slow composting item in here, which is this piece of corn. Doesn't seem to be getting consumed as quickly, but it's doing pretty good. You can see the middle's getting chewed out, just that some of the corn kernels on top are still intact. I almost thought that that would be one of the first things to go, but maybe they like the core even more. Down here low, still some paper, remnants of paper from the bedding we laid down. So if I do find any of that, as well as leaves, paper, leaves, bedding type stuff, I'm going to make sure that that just makes its way back down to the bottom in the feeding zone. Here's a little piece of what might be cabbage. I don't know. No, I think this is actually asparagus. I think there was a little bit of asparagus fed last week as well. And this is kind of an oddball thing. I told myself no slow composting items, but this is a mango pit, or at least the half of one. But I kind of looked the other way and I just left it. So I'm gonna let that slide. Just leave it be. Okay, let's feed. Alright, so we'll just put these slow composting objects back where I would expect them to be. This is just sort of a test that I'm doing to have some slow composting items in the bin. But everything else is designed, not designed, but fed in such a way that it's all fast composting soft items. So that, you know, at the end when it's time to harvest this bin, it won't be full of all kinds of food particles that are going to have to be sifted out of the material. Here again, I'm just checking to see how the feeding zone from days gone by is looking. When we first set this bin up in horizontal migrations, this was the feeding zone side, and we had since moved over to the opposite side. So I'm just curious sometimes to see if there's still worms hanging out there. Surprised to find them pretty much everywhere. Alright, so let's just level this whole baby back off again. Get the food items back down low. Just try to aerate some of this a little bit too if I can, as long as I'm down in here. Okay. Material's really fine, really beautiful stuff. But definitely due for a little bit of drying out. It's been very humid lately, but the forecast says that we're going to have some pretty nice dry weather coming up, low humidity, unlike what we've seen here in the past week or so. Okay, so now same setup as we've seen before. Lay down just a single sheet of paper with a little platform on which we're going to lay down a piece of banana peel and then surround it with the diatomaceous earth. And hope for the best. Hopefully this is what it takes to eradicate the mites. Okay, last but not least, the inverted piece of corrugated cardboard. Okay, so if I didn't forget stuff, then it wouldn't be me, right? So I just wanted to... Some of you might be thinking, yeah, you forgot to add coffee. And you're right, I did, but I'm not going to worry about that. The one thing that I did want to circle back to and take care of, which I almost forgot all about, was what we started with, which was the bait bombs. So why don't we peel back the feeding zone on this just a little bit, one more time, just to create a space where we can drop the newspaper that the bait bomb is in. It'll just wind up being bedding anyway. But this is the bait bomb that we fished out of my finishing tub earlier. So now we're going to be able to take a peek at how well it performed over the past, I don't remember, 8 or 9 days, trying to lure worms out of the compost. So again, it seems like it did a pretty good job. I don't see any signs of the melon that was in here to lure them out of the material. So I believe that they consumed all of that, which is cool. But let's just go ahead and put this newspaper. So yeah, we got a few worms out of the compost, which ain't bad. But yeah, I'm just gonna create another hole over here too. Just plop in the newspaper down there as bedding for them, and that, well, I believe, if I didn't forget anything else, I believe that should be the end of it. So. Like I said, this is my first try at using this stuff, so Diatomaceous Earth, I'm banking on you. I'm hoping that you're going to work for me, so let's hope it does. Yeah, keep your fingers crossed for me. Let's hope that we're able to eradicate this mite problem. I hope we can. I just wanted to also tend to one other something here, which which deserves a little bit of attention, which is my my nursery for the European Nightcrawlers. So my European Nightcrawlers were hatched out of cocoons, and there should have been 500 or so to begin with in here. But I'm just a little bit concerned because this container is a little bit damp as well. If you look down there, you could see some moisture. But you can see some Nightcrawlers cruising around. You can see a couple of them on this piece of corn cob here. And for that matter, if you break it in half, you can see that the middle's been pretty much chewed out. But I think that they're probably making some pretty good progress on the food that they've been given. So they've still got food in here, which is good. But I wanted to just give them a little bit more. And just to play it safe, I also wanted to apply a little bit of the Diatomaceous Earth into this container as well, just so that these little new additions to my population don't end up getting attacked in their infant stages. So yeah, I'm going to create a hole down here, and I'm going to try the rice that I was going to put into that last bin but forgot. So I'm going to plop a little bit of it down into the hole for them. Go ahead and give them what remains of this rice. But in addition to that, I also wanted to put some drier material in here to help sop up some of this moisture. So I'm going to put in a handful of leaves for them, maybe even 2. So this will hopefully absorb some of the moisture, give them a little bit more of a option for bedding to cruise around in if they want. Up here on top is I'm going to do what I did in the other bins, which is I'm going to create a little bit of a platform on which I'm just going to put these couple little pieces of cucumber and banana peel scraps that are still in my feeding bin, a little bit of leftovers for them. And then I just wanted to put in some of this diatomaceous earth as sort of a preventative measure. I don't know if there's mites in here necessarily, but in case they're thinking about moving in, or if they're in here already, hopefully this will be enough to get rid of them. Cover that up to create sort of a cozy spot for the mites to gather should they be in here, and then put this thing back on the shelf. So all right, once again, sorry to keep stringing you along, but this time I promise. Video's over. Bye bye. Thanks for watching and have a great day.